Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, back again with my eighth installment of my WrestleMania review series. The countdown to WrestleMania 41. This is WrestleMania 8. We're at number 8. And this pay per view took place on April the 5th, 1992. And I was 7 going on 8. I did not watch this pay per view. At this time, I was only seeing stuff like on Superstars, you know what I mean? So, anyway, let's jump right into it. Hopefully, David will hop on. David requested this one. So, this one comes to you from Indianapolis, Indiana, the Hoosier Dome, which is now called the RCA Dome. And this is the first and only, thus far, WrestleMania that's been held in the city of Indianapolis and in the state of Indiana. Indiana has a very interesting history with professional wrestling. We talked a little bit about it on WrestleMania 3, how the Indiana and Detroit territories had an interpromotional war going on in the 1970s. The Indiana territory was owned by Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder. So, and much like WrestleMania 3, this WrestleMania is outdoors. Kind of. You know, I mean, it has an outdoorsy feel to it. So let's jump right in. Bobby Heenan, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Gorilla Monsoon are your commentators. And at this time, Jesse Ventura is no longer there, and Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon are in their own this whole year, 1992. Bobby Heenan will play a very important role in the storylines, the main storyline. The main storyline going into it is we're introduced to somebody new on this WrestleMania series for the first time ever, and that is the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. I don't really got to go into who the Nature Boy Ric Flair is. Most people know who he is. He was the former NWA champion, multiple-time NWA champion at this point, the person who carried the NWA on his back in the 1980s. Was at the first Starrcade, the second Starrcade, all the Starrcades up until 1991 when he finally left the company. What prompted him to leave WCW? Well, as we talked about in other videos, the 1988 video in particular, there was new management in WCW. Ted Turner put Jim Herd in charge. Who's Jim Herd? Some guy who used to run the TV station for the St. Louis territory, but never was really in the office all that much, I'm guessing, with Sam Mushnick. And after he was out of the wrestling business, he ran a Pizza Hut. And this was the guy who Ted Turner in his regime, his initial regime, thought would be appropriate to run WCW. Didn't know shit. Wanted to make wrestling hunchbacks. Wanted to made actually a tag team known as the Ding Dongs. He ran everybody off. He ran Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard off. He ran the Road Warriors off. He ran Ric Flair off. Ric Flair tried to put up with his bullshit for the longest that he could, but we wanted Ric Flair to cut his hair and put an earring in his ear and call himself Spartacus. Motherfucker, this is Ric Flair. This is a legend in the wrestling business. This is the guy that's been carrying the company on his back for the past 9 years. And, 8 or 9 years by now. And you want to turn him into Spartacus? Are you kidding me? Jim Herd was out of his mind. Ric Flair says, I'm not doing it. I'm leaving the company. I'll drop the belt to Barry Windham. Like Ric Flair agreed that he would drop the belt to Barry Windham. But they're saying no, they want him to drop the belt to Lex Luger. He says, I'm not doing it. So in those days, when WCW was still part of the NWA, the champion had to post a bond, a cash bond. And when he lost the title, he would get the bond back. So Ric Flair is asking for his bond back. And WCW is not giving it up. So he says, you know what? Fuck you then. I'm walking out with the big gold belt, with the NWA championship. And he sends over the belt and going to the WWF. He sends over the belt. Bobby Heenan on an episode of Superstars appears with the big gold belt. Now at this time, I didn't know what the big gold belt was. I didn't watch the NWA, so I had no clue what the big gold belt was. A lot of older fans, smart Mark fans, they knew what the big gold belt was, but it wasn't until Ric Flair himself appeared on Primetime Wrestling in late 1991 with the title that, oh, I'm getting it now. They're calling him the real world's champion, basically insinuating that Hulk Hogan is not the real champion, that Ric Flair is the real champion. And Bobby Heenan, of course, having beef with Hulk Hogan like forever, he's coming out and insulting Hulk Hogan, saying he's not the real world champion. He's not the real world champion. Ric Flair, this man, Ric Flair is the real world champion. Now, WCW gets wind of this, and they sue the WWF. So eventually, they have to stop showing the big gold belt on TV, and they have to put the tag team belt with pixels over it in its place. So they're hyping this match up because here you have, during the 1980s, you had Hulk Hogan and you had Ric Flair. Ric Flair won his second NWA championship at Starrcade 83. Hulk Hogan won his first WWF championship in 1984. We talked about it. Each guy carried the promotion on his back for the entire decade. And the magazines, like Pro Wrestling Illustrated, they would hype both these guys up as champions. So our dream match in we fans' mind was, well, imagine if Hulk Hogan could face Ric Flair. Imagine if, by chance, either Ric Flair were to come to the WWF or Hulk Hogan were to go to the NWA, and we could finally have this dream match that we've all been waiting for. It's kind of like when Cody Rhodes in 2022, and we'll talk about it once we get to WrestleMania 38, crossed over from AEW to the WWE. Ric Flair was finally making that jump, because of the beef, because of the bullshit with Jim Herd. So he comes and he confronts Hulk Hogan. First guys he calls out in his first interview is Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, and Roddy Piper. Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan he has no history with. Roddy Piper he does have a history with. They were enemies during the 1970s when Piper was in Jim Crockett Promotions. So it's surreal for a longtime wrestling fan to finally see Ric Flair. Hell froze over. You never thought you would see Ric Flair on WWE TV. But here he is. Now, initially, he's paired with Bobby Heenan. Like I said, Bobby Heenan is his manager. But Bobby Heenan said in interviews he couldn't really keep up with Flair. Flair was a serial partier. You know how Flair is, going out partying, drinking like crazy. Bobby Heenan said his liver couldn't take it. So he goes back into retirement, and now Mr. Perfect is retired. Because of his back injury and because of the Lloyd's of London insurance policy that he has on himself, he retired from the ring after losing the Intercontinental Championship to Bret Hart in a fabulous match, one of the greatest matches in WWF history at SummerSlam 1991. If you haven't seen this match, go look at it. Mr. Perfect versus Bret Hart. SummerSlam 1991. Bret wins his first singles title, the Intercontinental. Slowly beginning his ascendancy to the world title, which at the end of 1992, we'll see how that bears out. But so Mr. Perfect is now the executive consultant, basically the manager to Ric Flair. So it's Bobby Heenan, Mr. Perfect and Ric Flair are like all this team, with Bobby Heenan on at the announce desk rooting for Ric Flair, Mr. Perfect out there as Flair's executive consultant. So they dropped this idea of the real world champion, and basically, how does Ric Flair make his debut? Well, it's Survivor Series, 1991. It's The Undertaker, only there for 1 year now. The Undertaker is the exact anniversary, Survivor Series, going against Hulk Hogan. And Ric Flair interferes. He slips a chair in the ring when Undertaker is about to tombstone Hogan. So Undertaker tombstones Hogan on the chair and pins him. Now, Undertaker, only a year in the business, is now the WWF champion, thanks to interference from Ric Flair. But Hogan wants a rematch. So at Tuesday in Texas, the WWF's trying to expand their pay-per-view market once again. They have the 4 big pay-per-views, but they're trying to expand it. And the 2 main events are Jake the Snake Roberts going against a returning Macho Man Randy Savage. We'll go into their feud later when we talk about Jake Roberts' match at WrestleMania 8. And Hulk Hogan versus The Undertaker. Hogan defeats The Undertaker by throwing ashes in his eye, basically cheating. So Hogan becomes the champion for the 4th time. But Jack Tunney comes out. Jack Tunney says, wait a minute, you cheated, and it's declared null and void. Now, fans are up in an uproar at Tunney because, come on, Undertaker cheated to win, and now Hogan cheated back to get the belt back, and you count it as null and void. Well, that's what Tunney does. So Tunney holds the championship up for grabs and says that the championship now is vacant, and the winner of the Royal Rumble will be the WWF champion. So people don't know, but this match was tailor-made for Ric Flair. A lot of people that were fans of the WWF, they didn't know this at the time because they never watched his hour-long matches. But long matches such as the Royal Rumble were tailor-made for Flair because he could go an hour. He was the 60-minute man in the NWA. So he comes in and he wins the Royal Rumble. This is the most star-studded Royal Rumble in history. You had the Texas Tornado, you had the British Bulldog, you had Mr. Perfect, you had Hulk Hogan, you had Sid Vicious, who also just came over. You had all these mega stars. You had the Macho Man Randy Savage. You had anybody who was anybody in the 1992 Royal Rumble. In the commentary, Bobby Heenan constantly cheering on Ric Flair. Roddy Piper, who wins the Intercontinental Championship at the Royal Rumble from the Mountie. There's a part where he's in the Royal Rumble and people thinking he could win both the Intercontinental Championship and the WWF Championship. Ric Flair is down. At first, it's every man for himself, so Piper starts beating up the other baby faces, and Bobby Heenan's like, it's not a skirt, it's a kilt, defending Piper. And then Piper hits Flair, and he's like, you ingrate, it's a skirt. Like he's cheering on Ric Flair the entire night at the Royal Rumble 1992. It's great stuff. Go back and watch this. But Ric Flair becomes the Royal Rumble winner for 1992 and the WWF champion. And now he's the WWF champion. And he goes, with a tear in my eye, I declare this is the greatest night of my life. And Flair and Heenan and Mr. Perfect are celebrating. It's a great moment. But what of Hulk Hogan now? Ric Flair's the champion, so stands to reason, they're going to set up the big match at WrestleMania 8, Hogan versus Flair. No. When Flair first came in, they did the match around the Horn in all the major arenas in the WWF, including Madison Square Garden, and it just didn't sell out. It didn't do the numbers that WWF had expected it to, because they said that fans weren't that used to Ric Flair. So they decide to do a pivot, and they decide to, at a press conference, to make Macho Man Randy Savage the #1 contender and have Hulk Hogan wrestle Sid. So the dream match that all the fans wanted of Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair will not be happening at WrestleMania 8. After Savage's feud with Jake the Snake Roberts, which started over after his wedding in SummerSlam, they waited till after the official wedding was over to do any shenanigans. And then Jake the Snake Roberts and The Undertaker send him a gift, and it's a snake inside. And he gets pissed, and he enters into a feud with Jake the Snake Roberts. And and then Jake the Snake Roberts actually slaps and put his hands on Miss Elizabeth, and he's gonna hit Miss Elizabeth with a chair. At this time, he and Undertaker are like a dastardly duo in the WWF. Jake and Undertaker, you know, they're both beating up everybody right there. They they put the Ultimate Warrior out of commission, basically, right? But it's a step too far for Taker that Jake is going to hit Miss Elizabeth with a chair. So when Jake goes to hit her with a chair from behind, Undertaker snatches the chair from him. And that begins the feud with Jake Roberts and The Undertaker going into WrestleMania 8. But as far as Randy Savage, once he beats him at Tuesday in Texas, it's over for Randy Savage and Jake. The stipulation of Randy Savage being retired was overturned after it was another letter writing campaign, and fans begged and pleaded for Jack Tunney to reinstate the Macho Man, and he reinstates him for good. And now Ric Flair is claiming that before Randy Savage and Elizabeth met, that he had an affair with Elizabeth, and then he has the pictures to prove it. And at WrestleMania 8, he's going to publish these pictures. A Playboy pinup, a nude pinup of Miss Elizabeth. He's claiming he's going to publish. He already published pictures in the WWF magazine, doctored up, of him and Miss Elizabeth, doing certain things, riding in horsebacks, feeding each other strawberries, sitting by the pool, different scenarios. And of course, this is making the Macho Man upset. This is even bigger in the Macho Man's mind than even the WWF Championship. And Hogan and Sid, what about that? Well, when Sid came into the company in 1991, he left WCW because of a contract dispute. It was weird. He was in a match with Elegante, who we'll talk about in the next installment. Elegante himself comes to the WWF as the Giant Gonzalez, but he was in a stretcher match with Elegante, and then he just walks out, Sid, right? He was a member of the Four Horsemen. He took the place of Ole Anderson, and he almost broke Brian Pillman's neck when they brought War Games back in '91. He's a real terror in WCW. He's Sid Vicious in WCW. But he decides he wants to leave WCW and come to the WWF, and the event they debut him in is SummerSlam 1991, and he's going to be the referee for the handicap match of Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior against Slaughter, Adnan, and Mustafa. Now he comes in as a heel, former Four Horsemen, former Skyscraper with Danny Spivey. He's always been a heel. He was a heel in Memphis. He was a heel in WCW. So people think, he's going to be a heel when he comes to the WWF. So the whole storyline revolves is will he be favorable to Hogan and Warrior, or will he be favorable to Slaughter and his team? He just says he's going to call it down the middle, and he does call it down the middle, and it ends up being a 3-on-1 handicap match because Warrior chases the heels to the back because backstage, Warrior didn't even want to do the match, right? He held Vince McMahon up for money. He says, I'm not doing the match unless I get paid such and such and such amount. Vince McMahon agrees to it, and only so they could do the match. And then after they do the match, word comes out through the curtain, and Vince fires his ass. So it's only Sid and Hogan in the ring at the end of SummerSlam, and they do a pose down, and they become best friends. They become a tag team. Now, but like Hogan's other tag teams, they don't last long. At the Royal Rumble, it's supposed to be every man for himself. Hogan gets eliminated. He blames Sid for it. Then he pulls Sid down. and he eliminates Sid, and fans are booing. And WWE tried to cover it up. WWE has to this day, I think on Peacock, tried to cover it up the boos that Hogan was getting for his actions. Hogan could have turned babyface on Sid, like Sid was that over with the fans. But they decided to turn Sid heel on an episode uh, of Primetime. Sid and Hogan are wrestling a match, a tag team match, and Hogan goes for the tag, and Sid just drops out, and Sid just walks away. Now Sid is aligned with Harvey Whippleman, and he's a heel going against Hulk Hogan for WrestleMania. Now, also, there is talk that this may be Hulk Hogan's last match. That's the big scuttlebutt of this. This is be Hogan's last match. He has a sit-down interview with Vince McMahon, where Vince McMahon says, "Thank you for the memories. Thank you for Hulkamania." Because Hogan, again, is trying to do movies. He has Mr. Nanny coming out next year in 93, and he's really trying to go, this time for real, into the movie industry and trying to really hang it up. That doesn't end up happening, and Vince is also, again, like he does with Warrior, trying to move on and possibly making Sid the number one. After WrestleMania 8, switching Sid back, he's called Sid Justice. Of course, it sounds like a babyface name, Sid Justice, right? He wants to switch Sid back babyface. And make him like the next Hulk Hogan. Sid doesn't want that, so he eventually walks out. But Vince has Plan B, and we'll see what that Plan B is at the end of WrestleMania 8. So let's just jump right into it. Like I said, April the 5th, 1992. A scheduled match between the British Bulldog and the Berserker, John Nord, was called off. So, and the opening dark match was a match between the Bushwhackers and the Beverly Brothers, who were the Beverly Brothers. They are Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos. Originally, they were they were working a construction gimmick in AWA, but they're here in the WWF, and they will eventually be managed by the genius, Lenny Poffo. Then it opens up with Reba McEntire singing singing America the Beautiful. And Bobby Heenan opens with a joke. Bobby Heenan, this is a homecoming for Bobby Heenan. He is from, he started his career in Indiana, and Indiana is basically his home. So his daughter said that when they did WrestleMania this year, WrestleMania 8, he was like Indiana's favorite son. But he makes a joke about the guy coming out next in the opening match, Tito Santana, who they repackaged Tito Santana. All these years he's been with the WWF. We've talked about him countless times at WrestleMania. Hell, the guy wrestled the first match ever at a WrestleMania against the Executioner at WrestleMania 1. But here he is. They've repackaged him. He's no longer just Tito Santana. Now he is El Matador, a Mexican gimmick, a Mexican bullfighter. Now, like I said before, in the 1992 year in review video, they do bullfighting in Spain, in Mexico, but it's more synonymous with Spain. So it really made no sense what they were trying to do with Tito. But hey, he's on his way out anyway. He's here to really put over the new talent, and the new talent is Shawn Michaels. Now, this is the first time that we're going to see Shawn Michaels as a singles wrestler. We've seen him other times with the Rockers, right? But now he is a singles wrestler. What happened with him in the Rockers? Well, on an episode of The Barbershop, him and Marty Jannetty were already having some dissension in the ranks because Marty failed to help him in a match he had with Ric Flair. So they take it to the barbershop, which is Brutus the Barber Beefcake's talk show on Superstars. And Beefcake is trying to help them, hash it out. And they do hash it out a little bit, right? Because the magazines are spreading rumors that they're going to break up. So when they shake hands and Michaels raises his hand and Bobby Heenan says, "I told you, Monsoon, one without the other isn't any good." And then Shawn Michaels super kicks Marty Jannetty and then throws him through the window. And then Bobby Heenan says that Jannetty was trying to escape. He said, "I told you, he don't need Jannetty." And there is the birth of the Heartbreak Kid. The name the Heartbreak Kid is given to him by Mr. Perfect. And Shawn Michaels just changes up his whole persona. Sherry was originally, after WrestleMania 7, she hooked up with Ted DiBiase during his match with Virgil. She came to his aid and hooked up with him. She was with him for a while. But then on an episode of The Funeral Parlor, which was Undertaker's talk show, she announced that she had a crush on a different wrestler, and that crush was Shawn Michaels. So she became Shawn Michaels' manager. And we see her out here with Shawn Michaels in the match against Tito. And looking really good, by the way. Probably the best Sherry has ever looked. And she actually sings Michael's theme song, Sexy Boy, the original person to sing it. Now Michael sings his own, but during those days, in the early days, Sherry sang it. And it was really cool because she came out and he pushed her down and when he did his pose and everything. They were really good together, Sherry and Shawn. It didn't really last long, but it was cool seeing them. And they're saying here that the stipulation is that the winner will take on the Intercontinental the Intercontinental Champion. And Shawn Michaels wins. Okay, the third match, and eventually that does happen. We think the Intercontinental Champion will be either Roddy Piper or Bret Hart. But eventually, Shawn Michaels on the last Saturday night's main event in '92 does get his match against the person who will be the Intercontinental Champion at that time, and that's the British Bulldog. The next match is The Undertaker. This is the second match in the streak. The Undertaker makes quick work of Jake the Snake Roberts. Like I said, they were a tag team, and they split up. And on the Funeral Parlor, Jake Roberts DDTs Paul Bearer, and this, of course, angers The Undertaker, and they have a match. Now, the real story behind this, there's a behind-the-scenes story to this. Right now, as we speak in 1992, I talk about in the 92 video, WWF is going through a lot of legal troubles. They're being investigated for steroids distribution because of a doctor that was under their employ named George Sahorian, who was allegedly distributing steroids to all the wrestlers. And while that's happening, there's a second investigation about child molestation, the Ring Boy scandal, which is what I talk about when I discussed Linda McMahon's appointment to the Department of Education in the Trump administration. What this basically is accusations that employees of the WWF are abusing children and sexual harassment of other former employees like announcer Murray Hodgson and Barry Orton, Randy Orton's uncle and Bob Orton's brother. And because of this, all the gay employees, Terry Garvin, Mel Phillips, and of course Pat Patterson, who is one of the main bookers and one of the main great minds behind creative in WWF, are fired. And Jake the Snake Roberts feels like he could have some input with creative. He's pretty much a creative mind in wrestling, a second generation wrestler himself. He feels like he can do more than just be a wrestler. Vince says no. So Jake says, okay, if that's the case, then I'm leaving. So this is Jake's last match with the WWF until 1996. He'll soon go to WCW, where he thinks he's going to get a huge contract because a guy named Kip Fry is running WCW at this point and giving out huge money deals. But pretty soon there'll be a new sheriff in town, somebody that Jake the Snake knows very well, and that's Bill Watts. So by the time Jake gets there in October to work his match with Sting for Halloween Havoc, Bill Watts is in charge and rips up Jake's contract and throws it in his face. And Jake is no longer in WCW after October of 1992 when he's on the Indies and he descends into the drug-fueled dissension that he got into, until 96 when he got the 1996 Royal Rumble when he comes back. But he loses this match. Jake hits Undertaker with two DDTs, and Taker gets up. He's the second victim of the streak, like I said. The next match is Bret Hart defeating Rowdy Piper. This match is incredible, man. The promo to this match is incredible. There is Roddy Piper says in the promo, he's talking about this. On screen, they're second cousins. They always Piper always claimed that because Piper is from Saskatchewan and Bret is from Calgary, close provinces to each other in Canada. So he claimed that he was second cousins to Bret. I know that's never been substantiated, but he's talking about growing up in Bret's house, what it was like with Bret's mother, Helen. And he said, I remember when you were this small. I remember when, your mother used to help you tie your shoelaces. When we were hungry, she used to make them sandwiches, man. She would make them sandwiches. It was only one piece of bologna, but I was hungry. And she used to pinch your cheeks. And then he goes to pinch Bret's cheeks. And Bret's like, take your hands off me. And he goes, I would have had him. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. And, man, Piper is in his own this whole beginning of the year because, like I said, Bret Hart was having negotiations with WCW. So they, WWF wanted to drop the Intercontinental Championship to the Mountie. So they come up with this storyline that Bret Hart had a fever when he was wrestling the Mountie, and that's why he lost the Intercontinental Championship. So Roddy Piper then challenges the Mountie at the Royal Rumble, and he wins. This is the first and only championship that Piper has won in his WWF career, and fans just go crazy. So Piper is coming in here as the Intercontinental Champion, taking on the former Intercontinental Champion, Bret the Hitman Hart, in a babyface match. And this is probably the best match that Roddy Piper ever had in his whole career. I mean, there's one scene where he grabs the bell. He grabs the ring bell, and he's going to use it. And Bobby Heenan says, what the hell? Use the bell. And the drama behind, is Piper going to turn heel? Is he going to turn on Bret? Is he going to cheat? And what's going to happen? And Bret Hart bleeds during this match. Now, at this time in 92, they have a no blood policy. But Bret Hart gets away with it by saying that he bled the hard way, right? And eventually, Piper puts on the sleeper hold. Bret pushes out from the turnbuckle and gets him in a roll-up and pins him for the 1-2-3. Man, if you don't, Bret Hart is really on a roll, man. Mr. Perfect match, the Demolition match in 1990. All these matches, Bret is just on fire in 92. And once again, he's the Intercontinental Champion for the second time. And at the end of it, he and Piper hug. And then they go to this segment with Lex Luger. Lex Luger just lost the WCW Championship at Super Bowl II to Sting, and they were going to make him the next Ric Flair, but he then leaves the company, and he's a non-compete clause, so they bring him in as a member of the WBF, and that's basically what this interview was about, Luger introducing the WBF to the WWF audience. Pretty straightforward interview. Next up, we have Big Boss Man, Virgil, Sergeant Slaughter, and Jim Duggan going against the Mountie, the Nasty Boys, and the Repo Man. Now, who is the Repo Man? The Repo Man is Barry Darsow, formerly Smash of Demolition. He now has changed gimmicks. Demolition is no more. So he it was repackaged as like a burglar slash repossession man known as Repo Man. He would go around stealing other wrestlers' gear. And like I said, Sergeant Slaughter is now babyface again. And he's with the babyface team. Virgil just had his nose broken by Sid, so he's wearing a funny type mask. And Ray Combs is out here. Ray Combs is the host of Family Feud. He's out here and he makes a lot of jokes regarding the heel team, making them upset basically. But this is pretty much a throwaway match, means nothing really. In the scheme of things, this will be the last time we'll see the likes of the Big Boss Man for a while. Last time ever for Sergeant Slaughter. Last time in a while for Jim Duggan. Last time for a lot of people. But the Bay Faces win. Then we get to the number 6 match, and that is Randy Savage versus Ric Flair. Now, this match is tremendous. I kind of look at this the same way I look at a match 10 years later, which is WrestleMania 18, where everybody going into WrestleMania 18, this is a preview ahead. We're not talking about it, but we will when we get there. But everybody wanted Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Hulk Hogan. That was the dream match that everybody wanted. But what we got was the second guy. Because in WWE/WWF, there's always one A and one B. There was always Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales. There was after Bruno and Pedro, there was always Hulk Hogan and Andre. After Hogan and Andre, there was Hogan and Savage. Then after Hogan and Savage, there was Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Then after Bret and Shawn, there was The Rock and Stone Cold. And after The Rock and Stone Cold was Cena and Batista. Then Cena and Orton. Right now, it's Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins. There's always a backup wrestler. If you can't get the A wrestler, you get the B wrestler. Well, that's basically what happened here. It was supposed to be the A wrestler, which is Hulk Hogan, and of course that fell through. So Randy Savage stepped up, and just like WrestleMania 18, I believe that Hogan and Rock ended up being the better choice, and then just like in here, Savage and Flair ended up being the better choice because Savage and Flair delivered a better match than Hogan and Flair would have delivered. This match is incredible. It involves Miss Elizabeth, and Flair gets blood too. Randy Savage comes out in the black and gold outfit. It was just great, man. And Randy Savage wins with a roll up, holding the tights. And Bobby Heenan loses his shit. Bobby Heenan's like, "You cheated, you cheated." And Mr. Perfect's like, "You cheated, you cheated. You had a handful of trunks. Just like your old lady, you're a cheater, Randy Savage. Just like your you went out there, you took a shortcut. This man, Ric Flair, has never taken a shortcut in his life, Randy Savage." And then Ric Flair goes, "Savage, when I see your old lady, I'm going to kiss her on those moist, wet lips." And before he said that, when they were out there, Liz comes out to try to save Randy Savage, and Ric Flair does kiss her. We never see the new photos. The new photos don't happen, but it's a fun match. And to see Bobby Heenan and Mr. Perfect lose their shit, I love going back to that in the interview. Oh, man. And then Macho Man's follow-up interview, he says, "Elizabeth, take it and go." He says, "You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. This is what makes you tick. This is what makes you tick, Ric Flair." Oh, man. We get to Tatanka and Rick Martel. Now, Tatanka is a new star. He He wrestled for a while in the Indies and the Carolinas. His name is Chris Chavis. He's an actual Lumbee Native American, and they're really pushing him. He is on a winning streak, and his winning streak will last until the end of 1993, where he will finally lose it to Ludwig Borga, going into Survivor Series. But right here, he wins against uh, against Rick Martel, and he's an actual Native American, not like Chief Jay Strongbow, who was for the longest time the Native American superstar in the WWF, but was actually Joe Scarpa, an Italian. Now we have the tag team championship match. The Road Warriors don't appear on this pay-per-view, which is LOD WrestleMania without the Legion of Doom. That is a travesty, guys. The Legion of Doom appear on this pay-per-view, but they don't wrestle on this pay-per-view. They do an interview segment. And it's one of the more memorable interview segments. They go, Hawk goes, "We were like a runaway train. Nobody driving us." Because why? They're going to introduce their manager from their WCW days, Precious Paul Ellering. Now, a lot of fans like me, again, just like with the Big Gold Belt, I didn't know who Precious Paul Ellering was. I never saw him before. Like, who's the hell is this guy? But they just lost. They lost the WWF Tag Team Championships, right? So they're looking for guidance. They got defeated by the natural disasters, so they're looking for guidance. So their guidance comes in the form of Paul Ellering, as well as later on a dummy named Rocco. And but it's a travesty that they do not appear. And, wrestle in this WrestleMania. David says, I think in my mind, Bob Backlund would have won the WWF title in the Royal Rumble match in 1992. Yeah, David, but I mean, that could have been a route they could have went to. That was something. Having Bob Backlund win the WWF Championship again was something that Vince McMahon wanted to do. Like David is saying, Bob Backlund makes his return to the company after years and years of being gone. Remember, he was the WWF champion before WrestleMania even existed, before the WrestleMania era, from 1978 to 1983. So fans like me that were little kids, we never saw Bob Backlund. We didn't know who he was. But the problem is, David, that if fans in the 70s and the 80s, the early 80s, before Hulkamania and before WrestleMania, chanted at Bob Backlund in Madison Square Garden that he was howdy doody. If he was a howdy doody looking motherfucker back then, and that was the late 70s and early 80s, imagine how we, who were used to Hulk Hogan, we were used to the Macho Man, we were used to these big, muscle-bound, colorful characters, with larger-than-life personalities, would have reacted to him. You know what I mean? Like, that would have been a huge gamble. I mean, I agree with you. He had the history. He had the pedigree. But we would have, my generation of fans, we would have shitted all over him. you know what I'm saying? He had heat in the 70s. So if he had heat in the 70s for being a howdy doody looking motherfucker, imagine what he would have been in 1992. You know what I mean? Even worse. you know what I mean? So like, he was pretty bland, pretty boring, pretty generic, and I liked him in '94, but he turned heel in '94. We'll get to that when we talk about WrestleMania 10 and especially WrestleMania 11, which he's featured in. But right now, David's right. He came back as a babyface. You know, Vince McMahon, I guess, thought that fans would fall in love with him again. They didn't, but he had an impressive record at the. He wasn't at the Royal Rumble 1992 though, David. He wasn't in that match. He had he gets the record in '93 for being in the Rumble the longest. But yeah, that would have been a route to go to, David. That was actually something that Vince, like I said, was thinking about in '92 when he wanted to take the belt off Flair for the second time. He was going to either put it on Tito Santana, Bret Hart, who he puts it on, or Bob Backlund. But yeah, like LOD doesn't get a match on this show, and the Natural Disasters defeat Money Inc. Natural Disasters were heels when they beat the Legion of Doom, but Jimmy Hart has turned on them, and Jimmy Hart now has a new team, IRS, who's Mike Rotundo. He's returned. He was in WCW as Michael Wall Street, and then he left WCW and came back to the WWE in early 1991, and he's now a tax collector. So, and this is the character that most of my generation remember him for. We don't really remember him for the U.S. Express and being in a tag team with Barry Windham. We remember him as the IRS, Irwin. Irwin R. Shyster as one half of Money Inc. So they'll become the tag team champions soon by defeating the Road Warriors again. And by the next WrestleMania, we'll see Money Inc., Ted DiBiase, and IRS as the WWF Tag Team Champions. But here they don't. Here they lose. The next match is Owen Hart versus Skinner. Now, Owen Hart, we talked about on WrestleMania 5, the match of Mr. Perfect. After that, he goes to WCW. He's in WCW for a while, for a little bit in 1991, basically for a cup of coffee. And then they come calling him back. First to be in a tag team with Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Neidhart as the new foundation, because Bret Hart is a singles wrestler now, and the Hart Foundation is broken up, so they formed the new foundation with these weird baggy MC Hammer-like pants that he and Jim the Anvil Neidhart wear. But after that, so that's basically what he's wearing now. But he's in singles action against Steve Kern, formerly of the Fabulous Ones, with Stan Lane. He's come to the WWF, and they make him, because he's from Florida, they make him an alligator hunter. Stupid gimmicks of the early 1990s. We're in the new generation era now. Anyway, pretty good match. Owen Hart will continue on in tag team action with a new tag team partner after Neidhart left. He'll be teaming with Coco Beware. And then finally we get to the main event, which is Sid Justice with Harvey Whippleman in his corner. Of course, Harvey Whippleman, always funny interactions with Howard Finkel. Howard Finkel would introduce him, and then he would go, "That's Dr. Harvey Whippleman to you, little man." Bruno Lauer, I think he's still alive. But anyway, he's the manager to Sid, giving Sid some heel credibility. And during the broadcast, this is the first time that unofficially Gorilla Monsoon refers to Sid as Psycho Sid. He refers to that in commentary, but Sid doesn't come back as Psycho Sid until 1995, his second comeback. This match sucked. You know what I mean? Like Hogan, there was a lot of hype around Hogan, this being his last last go around and this being his last match. The only thing that was good was like when the camera panned out, and you always see this image like when they do like video packages of Hulk Hogan and stuff. Like the camera pans out and it goes all the way down the aisle, and you see Hogan just standing there with all the Hoosier Dome, there. That was the only thing that was really good. Papa Shango, who was another person managed by Harvey Whitman at this time, uh, in the future he will be Kama. He will be the Godfather. He was formerly the Soul Taker in World Class Championship Wrestling. Charles Wright, he's a voodoo master, and he's supposed to do a run-in, but he comes in late. And it's funny because it actually looked like Sid pinned Hogan. You know what I mean? But this match ends weird. This match ends in a disqualification. I think they still wanted to see Sid, have some juice in him, have some life in him. So they didn't want to see him get pinned by Hulk Hogan. So Papa Shango comes out late. Both of them are beating Hogan up. And what happens? A surprise return of the Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior is back, a much more slimmed down version, haircut. This is like when I said that fans were having that rumor that it was a different Ultimate Warrior, that it wasn't Jim Hellwig, that it was Kerry Von Erich. Kerry Von Erich was now not in WWF as the Texas Tornado, but he was back as the second Ultimate Warrior. That wasn't true. Warrior just got off the steroids. That's why he looked a lot slimmer. But he comes out to save his former rival and WrestleMania opponent, Hulk Hogan. And that's how the show ends. One of the biggest returns in WrestleMania history up to that point. Sid and the Ultimate Warrior were supposed to have a program together, and Ric Flair and the Old Warrior was supposed to have a feud together. Neither one materializes for different reasons. Sid walks out of the company and goes back to WCW. He's always walking out. Like each and every time he's walking out of different promotions. R.I.P. Sid. This is so timely because Sid passed away last year. I did a video on my channel at school when Sid first passed away. He passed away on my birthday, actually the anniversary of his WWF debut. August 26th was when he debuted at SummerSlam 1991. But Sid walks out of the company. He doesn't want to work with the Ultimate Warrior, and he goes back to WCW. So there goes his push. Warrior, I guess they were going to push him back to the title. But that ends up not happening for various reasons. One of the biggest reasons it ends up not happening is because he's fired. Not so long after that, because of the pressure behind the steroids. This is one of the reasons why David's point is really valid too. Why they would want to pick somebody like Backlund, because Backlund was natural. Backlund wasn't on steroids. They want to get away from the steroided people, the steroided monsters, and go to like a lot of the smaller guys. So Warrior wouldn't be a good choice, but they want to do it. But he gets caught. Him and British Bulldog get caught, and they're both fired from the company for this reason. But Warrior does have a match with the Macho Man Randy Savage. Yeah, no doubt, David. It makes perfect sense. They want to get away from these steroided guys, so pick somebody natural. Warrior does have a match with the Macho Man at SummerSlam 1992, Wembley Stadium. It's a babyface match. The whole storyline revolves around whose corner will Ric Flair be in. I don't know. Maybe they were going to try to turn Warrior heel. Maybe that was the storyline, but it didn't make much sense otherwise, because why would Ric Flair choose either guy? I mean, They're both baby faces. Why would Ric Flair be in either one's corner? you know. So then Ric Flair and Warrior get into a feud, and then for Survivor Series, it's set up. Scott Hall is coming in. Scott Hall from WCW. He was the Diamond Stud, formerly in AWA, partners with Kurt Hennig. Kurt Hennig arranges for him to come to WWF, and they choose the Razor Ramon gimmick for him. He'll factor in next year, WrestleMania 9. The next episode, we'll talk about him and the guy that David thinks should have won the Royal Rumble, because they'll have a match at WrestleMania 9, Bob Backlund and Razor Ramon. But he comes in with a Scarface gimmick. Originally, Vince McMahon wanted to call him Shrug Shadow, like I said. But he starts quoting Scarface to Vince. Vince has never seen it. Vince is like, oh, this guy's a genius. So they make a whole Scarface gimmick for him. And he comes in as Ric Flair's partner against the Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage. But when at Survivor Series 1992. But after the Ultimate Warrior is fired, Savage needs a new partner. So in an episode of Primetime Wrestling, Savage appears via satellite, and he nominates Mr. Perfect. And Bobby Heenan's like, Mr. Perfect would never be your partner. You walk behind Ric Flair. You walk behind Ric Flair. Like, Heenan's just laughing because they turn Primetime Wrestling into like a wrestling version of the McLaughlin Group, where all these wrestlers, the heels and babyface, are arguing back and forth with each other, just talking. So Heenan's sitting next to Mr. Perfect, and he's laughing it up. And Mr. Perfect says, I am going to be Macho Man's partner. He turns babyface on Heenan. Heenan's begging off like a pussy. He pours water on Heenan and stuff. It's real great stuff. So now Mr. Perfect is a babyface, and him and Randy Savage take on Razor Ramon and Ric Flair at Survivor Series 1992. It's a pretty good match. But Ric Flair, as far as the WWF Championship, Ric Flair does end up winning the WWF Championship back from the Macho Man with help from Razor Ramon. That's how Razor Ramon debuts. Razor Ramon debuts and costing Macho Man the championship, and Ric Flair wins it back. But then, like David and I were saying, Vince is looking for somebody else different. So he has three candidates. Tito Santana, who's El Matador. He's not on steroids. Backlund, who just came back, also not on steroids. And Bret the Hitman Hart, not on steroids. So he chooses Bret the Hitman Hart in a house show in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Untelevised, Bret the Hitman Hart defeats Ric Flair for the WWF Championship. So going into 1992, closing 1992, going into 1993, Bret Hart is now the WWF champion. And he has a match with Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series 1992. And that's the end of 1992. Now we go into 1993 with Bret Hart as the champion. We go into WrestleMania 9, and that's the next installment. WrestleMania 9, live from Las Vegas, Nevada, Caesar's Palace. This was the first time that the WWE was in Las Vegas, Nevada, and WrestleMania 41 will be the second time ever in history. But that's WrestleMania 8 for you. WrestleMania 9 will have a lot of twists and turns, a lot of surprises. And it'll be the first WrestleMania that I watched live as it was going on, other than just one match. I watched, of course, WrestleMania 6, but I only watched that one match, Hogan and Warrior. But the first time that I was allowed to order it live as it was happening, not on tape later on, live as it was happening, was WrestleMania 9. And we'll be talking about that one next. Peace. Guys, thank you, David, for contributing. I totally agree with your opinion, and we will be talking about Bob Backlund when we get to the next WrestleMania. Now, I warn you guys, WrestleMania 9 is a shitty show, and I'll try to make the review as entertaining as possible. Peace. Thank you, David, for contributing.